Dr. Sage here, back with the second lecture talking about the protists. In this lecture, we're going to talk about how we classify the protists. This diagram shows a proposed classification of the domain Eukarya. Currently, the domain Eukarya is divided into 6 supergroups. Within each supergroup are multiple kingdoms. Dotted lines indicate suggested evolutionary relationships that remain under debate. So, for example, within the domain Eukarya, you have the kingdoms fungi, animals, land plants, and protists, which is basically everything else on this list. Now, as I mentioned in the last lecture, the protists are kind of ill-defined. We're still trying to classify them. For example, this is not the only way you could divide them into supergroups. Some scientists, instead of dividing them into 6 supergroups, would divide them into 4 supergroups. There's different ways of classifying the protists because we're still trying to elucidate their relationship between each other. But we're going to go with the version that your textbook has, which is this version divided into the 6 supergroups. So now let's start to learn about the different types of protists. Let's start up here with this group, the Archaeplastida. Okay, this includes the algae and the land plants. Okay, so land plants, that's one of the kingdoms, so those are not protists. Okay, but these other ones are protists. Algae refers to many phyla of protists that carry out photosynthesis. Most of them are unicellular, but some form filaments or form colonies. Some are multicellular and resemble the leaves of lettuce. So the first category, the red algae. Red algae is multicellular. There's about 5,000 different species. They live mostly in warmer seawater, some as deep as 200 meters, and they have economic importance. For example, from the algae we get agar, which is used to make capsules to take like vitamins, dental impressions, cosmetics, culture medium, electrophoresis, and food prep. Also, the reddish-black wrappings around sushi rolls consist of processed blades of red algae. So, had sushi before? Then you've eaten a protist. Next, we have the green algae. Okay, there's about 7,500 species. They inhabit a variety of environments, including oceans, freshwater, snowbanks, tree bark, and turtles' backs. Many are symbiotes with fungi, plants, or animals, and their morphology varies, as you can see in these figures. Land plants are also within the Archaeplastida group, but we're going to talk about land plants in later chapters. We're not going to talk about them in this lecture. Plants thought to be derived from green algae because both groups have cell wall that contains cellulose, possess chlorophylls A and B, and store excess food as starch. Okay, so the closest living relatives of land plants are these green algae, the chlorophytes and the charophytes. The charophytes being the one that most recently diverged away from the land plants. Next supergroup, we have the Amoebozoa. This includes slime molds and amoeba with lobe-shaped pseudopods. Amoeboids are protists that move and ingest food with those pseudopods. The pseudopods would be these things here, stands for false feet. That's how they move and eat their food. Next supergroup, we have the Apisoconta. Many members contain a single flagellum. Remember, that's a long tail that spins like a propeller and allows them to move. In Apisconts, the flagellum is posterior. Now, if you notice, within this group, we also have fungi and animals. But again, we're going to discuss those in later chapters because we're not talking about the fungi or animals today. We're talking about the protists today. Next supergroup, we have the Riseria. Riseria are amoebas using pseudopodia to move and feed. They have thin, thread-like pseudopodia. Radiolarans contain internal silica skeletons, and forearms contain porous shells called tests of calcium carbonate. Their skeleton are components of sedimentary rock. Next supergroup, we have the chromoheavy, which is made up of the aviolates and the stremopiles. Okay, so the aviolates include dinoflagellates, okay, which are biflagellated as they have 2 flagella, include photoautotrophs, heterotrophs, and mixotrophs, are endosymbiotes of corals, and rhizarians. Okay, besides the dinoflagellates, we also have the apiocomplexans, okay, which typically are parasites of animals, and some cause serious human diseases. For example, malaria is caused by an apiocomplexan, which is a type of aviolite, which is a type of protist. The infectious cells contain an organelle at the apex used for penetrating hosts, which helps them to actually infect your cells. They typically have very complex life cycles. Then we have the ciliates. They use cilia for movement and feeding. So these things that look like hairs on this organism, those are not hairs, they're cilia, which can move and allow the organism to move. They lack a cell wall. They have large macronuclei and small micronuclei. In other words, they have more than one nucleus. Then we have the stromopiles. They contain both unicellular, colonial, and multicellular organisms. An example of this is seaweeds, which seaweeds are multicellular brown algae, also called kelp. The majority are photoautotrophs, so they do photosynthesis. They use up carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and produce sugar like glucose. And also, the diatoms are primary producers. So they're one of the things that brings food into the ecosystem. Basically, they create the sugars, the glucose, through photosynthesis. Diatoms are the most abundant aquatic photoautotrophs, and they have great influence on global carbon dioxide levels. So they take in carbon dioxide, and they convert that carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen, which is very useful for all the other organisms living on this planet. Next supergroup, we have the excavata. Most are single-celled organisms with a feeding group. They typically have flagella, and they have diverse nutrition modes. Most are heterotrophs, but some, like this one here, is photosynthetic. Some have unique or reduced mitochondria, and they obtain their energy through aerobic cellular respiration. So, some examples of the excavata. Well, some are well known for causing various diseases in humans. For example, trichosoma causes African sleeping sickness. So you can see these red blood cells from a human. These are the protists that cause sleeping sickness. Another example, giardia is the most common flagellate in the human digestive tract. It causes severe diarrhea. Cysts are transmitted in contaminated water, and beavers are important reservoir hosts. Also, we have the trichosomas that are a sexually transmitted protist. They infect the urogenital organs and are a common cause of vaginitis. Okay, so that was a quick run through of the different supergroups of the protists and the different categories within those supergroups. As you can see, they're a very diverse group of organisms. Most of the time you don't hear about them in your biology classes because most of the time we don't think about them, we don't see them. But many of them can cause problems for humans. They can cause human diseases, while others are very beneficial for humans. For example, doing photosynthesis to bring oxygen to our environment and food to our ecosystem. Okay, so those were the protists. That was the first category of eukaryotes we're discussing in this course. The rest of this course we're going to spend learning about all the other types of eukaryotes, which is the fungi, the land plants, and the animals. And the rest of the semester, that's what we're going to be discussing. So until then, this has been Dr. Sage.